Good morning and welcome to Redeemer. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Sometimes when it comes to Bible stories, we have only vague recollections or bare outlines of the major events. And probably for many of us, that's true when it comes to the story of Jonah. If we know anything much about Jonah, we think we remember a story about how he was swallowed by a whale. In fact, the Bible never says it was a whale, but rather a big fish. Now that's a pretty small point and doesn't really mean anything, but it does point out that there are parts to some Bible stories that we either have wrong or miss entirely. And many of the stories speak important things to us beyond the parts we may remember. So my hope this week is to walk you through the story of Jonah so that we experience the whole spectrum of the message from God to us. So let's begin at the beginning. Jonah 1 through 3 reads, Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah set out to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid his fare and went on board to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. There are some interesting things for us to consider right there in those first 3 verses. The first thing to think about comes right in the very first verse. The word of the Lord came to Jonah. What does that mean? Well, I think he probably felt some kind of stirring in his heart. He saw the wickedness of Nineveh and felt God calling him to do something in response to that. That might be a way of saying that God gave Jonah a call. God gave Jonah a calling. Jeremiah talks about this kind of thing too. He was given a message that he didn't want to preach, and he talked about trying to hold it in and not say it. And then he said, and when I do, it's like there's a fire in my bones. I think Jonah must have felt something like that, because I think when God gives a call, that's how you feel. I also believe that God gives each of us a call, and I worry that sometimes we are too lethargic and complacent to bother listening for one, much less to respond to one. And that's the second point, how Jonah responded. He did his best to extinguish that fire in his bones by boarding a ship to Tarshish. Let me unpack that for you. Jonah is in Israel, gets a call from God to go to Nineveh, which is in what we call Syria today, up a little north of Israel. And instead of going there, he heads west to the shore and boards a ship for Tarshish, which most scholars now believe was on the west coast of Spain. In other words, Jonah received the call of God and did everything he could to go in exactly the opposite direction from where he was supposed to go, and to go as far away from where he was supposed to go as he could in the known world. Does that sound like us sometimes? Like Jonah, do we run from God's call, putting obstacles and objections and excuses in the way of doing what God has called us to do? Oh, how often we answer God's call by fleeing to Tarshish. The last part of verse 3 is also important. Jonah thought he was going away from the presence of the Lord. But of course, you can't do that. Even as Jonah fled, God was with him. And perhaps there's some comfort for us there too. For even as we flee the call of God, God is with us still in love and grace. Perhaps, though, the message today is not to have Jonah as our model of faith. Rather, perhaps our ears should be attuned to God's call, and our hearts eager and willing to answer with a resounding, yes, here am I. Send me. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.